Hi everyone, my name is Chris, and you are again with me for another episode of At Home Nikon TV. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to talk about how to choose the right tool, in this case, the right telephoto lens. I'm going to have a very special guest, Brad Hill. Some of you may know him. He's a phenomenal photographer. He's also a blogger. He's a reviewer. He's a biologist, he runs photo tours. There's a lot to kind of go into. So I'm only going to kind of be able to chip at a very, very small piece of him today. But he will be joining us online, so I'll get to that afterwards. Lastly, in the Getting to Know Your Camera segment, today I'm going to be talking about picture controls. And as usual, I will be putting a link down below for an article. It's actually from our Learn and Explore, Nikon Learn and Explore's site, which has a ton of articles from flash to macro to focus shift shooting to video to portrait, you name it, it is on there. And there's also an article on picture controls. Why to use them if you're a JPEG shooter, a RAW shooter, a video shooter. There's a lot on for a lot of reasons for each of those in the article, but also cover them today as well. As always, I want you guys in the comments below to let me know if there's other things that you want to know about for the Getting to Know Your Camera feature for future episodes. So I already got some good comments from our YouTube page. Somebody was asking about some of the terminology on a lens, when to use VR, active, what is sport, why normal, when to turn it off, and even some of the switches, A, MA, AM, why to use one over the other. So I'll get into that with a future episode, and let me know what you guys want to hear about below. But let's get into it. So I'm now going to start talking about choosing the right lens. And this is kind of precipitated by last week's episode in which I talked about the 120 to 300 f2.8, this amazing telephoto lens, which we will be hearing Brad talk about as well. Somebody brought up in the comments, it was Chris LeBlanc. Chris LeBlanc brought up saying that his Sigma 150 to 500 or 600 lens was better than this, 13 times better because it's 13 times cheaper. And personally, I'd prefer if he had said my Nikon 200 to 500, but I'm going to assume that he purchased his Sigma before we came out with our 200 to 500. But that his comment brings up a really good point that, to be totally honest, not every lens, not every body, not every accessory that Nikon comes out with is geared towards everybody. We do have specific products for specific users, because the amazing thing about photography, especially interchangeable lenses, whether they be mirrorless or DSLRs, is you have the ability to customize your gear, your kit, to how you want to shoot. And his comment kind of brings that home in that, you know what, not everybody has the ability to even consider a 120 to 300, whether it's due to the size, due to the weight, due to the price. There's a lot of different reasons why that may not be for you. So while I am going to talk about this lens with Brad later on, for the first little while, I'm going to talk about 5 other key full frame telephoto zoom lenses that Nikon has, and kind of break them down for the different customers that I would expect to be picking each and every one of them up. Now, before I get into those 5, let me quickly just kind of talk about why to even use a telephoto lens. Well, obviously, people are going to think wildlife, they're going to think birding, they're going to think sports, and for me, that's kind of the go-to. For me personally, when I do a lot of my personal travel, when I'm out shooting, I actually use a telephoto lens for landscapes quite a bit. It allows me to really kind of get a nice compression of the scene, something you normally wouldn't be able to see from a wide angle lens. I'm also able to create a lot of isolation between the subject that I want, whether it's because the viewer isn't looking at a whole wide angle shot, it's just I'm able to really kind of narrow their field down. So for me, a landscape lens doesn't necessarily mean it has to be wide angle. It can be a telephoto as well. So which of the 5 am I going to talk about? Well, I'm going to start off with the AFP 70 to 300 VR lens. Now this is the new AFP version. We obviously do have a couple DX versions as well, and we also have a 50 to 250 Z that we've just announced. But the AFP 70 to 300, for me, the customer for that is whether they want something small and light. If they say, you know what, I don't want to be carrying around these big heavy lenses, I need something small, light. I have a kid that I'm going traveling with, so my entire camera bag isn't cameras anymore. Now I have to put in diapers and formula and worry about all that other stuff. So I may not be able to carry around a big heavy lens. At that point, I would say to the person, you know what, the 70-300 is perfect. It's small, it's light, and thanks to the AFP motor, that's a pulse motor. This pulse motor is very similar to what we're actually seeing in our Z lenses with the stepping motor. So that means the focus is unbelievably fast, it's unbelievably quick, and for video in particular, that means you're going to get really smooth and subtle autofocus, and you will not be able to hear that the autofocus motor if you're using that inboard built-in microphone. So there's a lot of good reasons if you're shooting video with it, if you're wanting something small and light, the 70-300 for under $1,000, great option. Next up is if you're going to be tipping the balance a little bit more in terms of image quality, but you're willing to trade that off in terms of focal length, the 70-200 f4 is my next option. For me, that's probably Nikon's one of our most kind of underrated lenses. It goes pretty much everywhere with me when I go traveling personally. Whenever I'm going out and I know I'm going to need a telephoto, but I don't want something big and heavy, the 70-200 f4 really kind of fits the bill for me. It's great build quality, great optical quality, but the one downside is that it doesn't quite go as far as that 300. So it's a 70-200, but it's a constant f4 aperture. So the entire range from 70 to 200 is f4 the entire time, giving you a lot of versatility when you're in low light. Now, if you do need even better low light, that's when we really step up to the 70-200 f2.8e FL version. So the FL version is, I don't think there's any other way to say it, it's mind-blowing. It is absolutely amazing how good this lens truly is. Now, when we first came out with it, I was going on a big trip. I was going to Africa, and my initial thought was I was going to bring the 70-200 f4. But I said, you know what, we have this new 2.8. I really want to kind of prove to myself how much better it is than the previous versions. So I brought the 70-200 FL, and I cannot tell you how impressed I was with that lens then, but it's continued to impress all the way up till now. In terms of optical quality, basically it rivals prime lenses, which up until that point, you usually had to have a bit of a trade-off. I'm using a zoom lens, okay, I know it's not going to... With the FL version, you really are not having to worry about that. Now again, just like the F4 version, it's only 70-200, so you're not getting quite the reach. The nice thing about both the 2.8 and F4 though is we do have 3 teleconverters that can be used. We have a 1.4 times, a 1.7, and a 2 times. So if you do need basically a one lens solution that gets you all the way from 70 all the way up to 400, if you want to go all to that distance, you could go and throw on the 2 times teleconverter and just with one lens get all the way from 70 all the way up to 400. Now, if you do want even further, that's when the next option comes in. So that's now the 200 to 500 f5.6 EVR lens. This 200 to 500, it's a little bit more specialty because it does only give you the range of 200 to 500. But when you kind of cross combine the image quality with the price of it, because we're under $2,000 for a 200 to 500 lens, when you combine that price with the quality, I am blown away. This is just a phenomenal lens. And when I went to Africa, so actually my number one body and lens was the 200 to 500 with a D500. And then my secondary kind of wider angle kit was the D5 with a 70-2. So those were my 2 kind of perfect lenses. They gave me all the way from 70 all the way up to 500. I had 2 great different options for close-up or for wide angle. Close-up or for tight. So the 200 to 500 was amazing for those tight animal shots that I really wanted to get. But that 70 to 200, whether the animal got closer, I could go and shoot it then. But I also really used that lens to get some, I'll call them environmental portraits of the animals when I wanted to make it not just about the animal, but also about the environment as well. So I was really able to kind of use those 2 lenses side by side to get some amazing shots that I was really happy with, and they worked really well together. But the downside is they are big and heavy. When you go and put both, let's say you have those two lenses in one body and you're going to be swapping them back and forth, that still does take up quite a bit of room in your bag if you are hiking it across the country through different planes. So there is another option, and that is the 80 to 400. Now the 80 to 400 is kind of the best of both worlds in some ways. It really allows you to get 80 all the way out to 400 without a single break because it's all in one lens. So it really does kind of replace a couple lenses in one. Now, me personally, I do like the final optical quality that I'm getting out of the 200 to 500 over the 80 to 4. But when I have somebody come up to me and they say, you know what, I need versatility. I want to be able to get one lens that does everything, and I'm able to kind of leave other lenses at home and not be burdened by them, then that 80 to 400 is spectacular. So we had the 70 to 300, small, light, great for video. We had the 70 to 200s, both the f4 and the 2.8. We had the 200 to 500, which is spectacular for getting that close distance, whether you're wildlife or birding. When you're birding, you never can get enough focal length, so that 200 to 500 really comes into its own, especially on a crop body. And then that incredibly versatile 80 to 400. Now we do have two other higher end, very pro zoom lenses. That is our 120 to 300 f2.8 and the 180 to 400 with the built-in teleconverter, the built-in 1.4. Those are kind of on the higher end of things. And I'm going to kind of use those two lenses as a nice little segue into getting our guest speaker for the day, Brad Hill, to come on, and I'll pick his brain about a number of topics, but I will be mainly talking about the 120 to 300 because currently right now he is in the process of reviewing that. So I'd mentioned he has a blog site. So a couple things about that blog that for me make it a really good tool for me to just kind of bounce my own ideas and say, okay, well, this is what I've seen in my testing. What do other people think about it? Well, I'm able to read his site and get a really unbiased view for a couple reasons. One, his site has no advertising. That means he gets no money from anything that he writes up there. It's not going to be clickbaitish. It's not going to be, oh, buy this due to this link. Nope, none of that. So he's just putting up the gear that he's reviewed that he wants to. The other reason that I feel it's mostly unbiased is the fact that he's actually putting his money where his mouth is. He's not calling me up and saying, hey, Chris, I know you're testing the 120 to 300. Can you send it on to me for a couple weeks and let me play with it? He's actually going and buying every single piece of gear that he reviews on his site. If he likes it, it stays within his kit. If he doesn't like it, then he goes, turns around and sells it used. So he really only purchases and only reviews items that he's interested in. So I love reading a site just because it gives me a little bit more of an unbiased feel than you're usually going to get online, just due to the fact that he's not getting any money from it and he's buying the camera gear himself. So he is a blogger. He's an amazing photographer. I'm sure he's going to be wanting to show off some of his images that he's got with the 120 to 300. Great photographer. He also runs photo tours as well. I know that there's whenever the talk of photo tours and which ones would we like to go on, the people at the office. I know that between myself and a couple others, Brad Hill's photo tours always come up as kind of one or two that we would love to go to. He sees a lot of marine life. He does the Spirit Bears in Western British Columbia in Canada. So he's hitting a lot of areas that are special and amazing. And having the biologist background, he's really able to know the behavior of these animals as well. So you're really getting not only the photography, but also the biology. He's hearing about the behaviors. So there's a really, really nice mix that you're able to get on his tours. But let me stop rambling about him. Let me get him on here. Let me grab my headphones so I can actually hear him and he'll hear me nicely through the mic. And let me get him on. All right, so Brad, thank you very much for joining us. Brad Hill, I've already given the viewers a beautiful, flowery intro. Don't worry, nothing bad. I guarantee it was all amazing. But thank you very much for joining us. I know that I'm in isolation just like you are. You have a way more property than I do, a lot more kind of fun areas that you're able to go in to actually still shoot it. shoot in because most of us are kind of stuck inside. We're not able to go shoot. So you've been doing some reviewing on the 120 to 300, our new f2.8 lens. And just to kind of give you a little bit of kind of get you up to speed, the viewers and I already went over kind of getting to know your camera and choosing the right lens. And in that, I talked about the AFP 70 to 300. I talked about the 270 to 200s, the 2 to 5, the 80 to 4. But I left the newest edition, the 120 to 300, for you because you have been doing a lot of reviewing on it recently. You've been posting slightly on your blog so far. But I kind of wanted to get into in your preliminary test. I know you don't want to go and give any concrete answers. Are there any trends that you're seeing so far with the 120 to 300 in terms of sharpness, bokeh? How's it faring against some of the other lenses that you're putting it up against?
Yeah, Chris. And yeah, the 120 to 300 is just a pleasure to shoot. I've been shooting it now for about 3 weeks. And like you mentioned, I'm lucky enough that I've got some land around me that I can be out still doing my physical distancing and doing a lot of shooting. Unfortunately, I won't be adding lots of sexy grizzly bear shots and those sorts of things in the next little while. But well, they could wander onto my property. But that being said, yeah, the 120 to 300, I was intrigued by it initially because the first sort of new super telephoto introduction since the 180 to 400.
Which
And
you've
as you
loved.
exactly, I found I had historically I'd been a prime shooter in the long focal ranges, and although I've owned a lot of super telephoto zooms, I always seem to gravitate back towards the primes. But the 180 to 400 really turned my head in that regard. First, it turned my head in terms of price, sorry to say, but it was funny because I think, like much of the wildlife photography world, I was a little bit shocked by that when I first saw it. But once I started using the lens and realized it would replace multiple primes in my kit, I all of a sudden went, wow, this isn't so bad.
It may not be as fast, but in terms of sharpness, in terms of just overall image quality, I don't think
Yeah.
people until they shoot with it, they really realize how mind blowing it really is, how game changing it truly is to have that amount of range, but that amount of image quality to go with it. It's crazy.
Yeah, you're functionally carrying multiple prime lenses is what you're doing. And for someone I travel a lot of times into remote areas where we're either in float planes, sometimes helicopters, and we have to be looking at ways to optimize our field kit. And so, you're looking to balance off quality with a minimal kit. And when you can get something like the 1 400 and replace multiple primes, it's stunning. So, as context, when that after that lens came out, um, and I saw the 120 to 3 coming, I was quite excited because partly because the f2.8 aperture, of course, and what you can do in terms of isolating your subject from the background with an aperture like that, but also excited about the quality I expected out of the lens. And so the 180 to 400, in a sense, set my own expectations extremely high for the 120 to 3. And of course, when you saw the price, you realized that they probably did the same thing in terms of pouring effort into that lens. And boy, I've been really happy with it to this point. The things I look for is kind of like I'm trying to combine a real biting sharpness in the lens with beautiful, smooth, buttery out of focus zones. Which I've given you an image there, Chris. Of sorry for the dog shots, but one of my dogs, running at me full speed, showing and shot wide open with at 300 millimeters, showing exactly what kind of mixture of biting sharpness you can get with those smooth out of focus zones. So initially, super pleased with it. And along the way, one thing that I had been thinking about, and this was again partly because of the 180 to 400, is most what people will know the 180 to 400 has an internal teleconverter you can engage or disengage. And it works phenomenally well, which surprised me when I had never been a use teleconverters with a Zoom person. I'd
Me
always
neither.
thought teleconverters have their place with certain prime lenses, but forget about using them with zooms. Well, that view started evolving very quickly with the 180 to 400. And I started thinking, well, even though there's not a built-in teleconverter with the 120 to 3, how will it operate? So shortly on in just my sort of initial phase of testing, where I just go out and literally just shoot with the lens. I call it, yeah, I have a very technical name for it called just shooting. during that phase, I decided, well, let's throw a TC on this thing and see how it works. And I chose to use the 1.4, the TC 14E3. Wow, I was shocked. Like, it was, of all the lenses I've shot with teleconverters, it's really hard to beat the 400 millimeter f2.8 prime. But this one may beat it in terms of just virtually no degradation in image quality in terms of sharpness or in the nature of the autofocus zones, which sometimes teleconverters can mess with. And
Absolutely.
in this case, it's stunning. And I've got a shot there as well. Another shot with my D5 with the shot wide open, so at f4, with the teleconverter on it, again at 300 millimeters, so a 420 millimeter equivalent when you factor in the teleconverter. A poncho running at me again, and you just look at that and you go, oh my God. And so it also speaks a little to the autofocus, because another impact you sometimes find with teleconverters is a bit of an negative impact on autofocus performance. And so far, I've been just having virtually no impact. And so for me, it opens up a whole range of possibilities when I can combine it with a crop sensor camera like the D500 and throw in a teleconverter and get, top-notch image quality. I've included a shot there as well where I did just that and shot it almost wide open. There was a, excuse me, a junco, a small perching bird, on a snag. And traditionally with birds like that, you want big lenses. You're generally shooting 4 or 5, usually 600 millimeters or more. Well, I'm shooting an equivalent there, handheld, 630 millimeter focal length. If you compared it to a full frame camera, and just getting stunning quality out of it. So, it's been just fantastic in that regard. So early indications are looking really good. And I have done some of my more systematic testing at this point, and I haven't really had a chance to absolutely scrutinize with complete attention all the images yet, but at this point it's stacking up with the best primes at every focal length that I've shot it with. So at the 300 millimeter, I'm comparing it to the 300 millimeter f2.8 VR2 version, the 300 millimeter f4D, which is a surprisingly sharp lens, as well as other lenses. Matter of fact, the Sigma 120 to 300, which I also own, I'm comparing it to that. And some other lenses at shorter focal lengths, like the 70 to 200 f2.8E. And all I'll say at this point is that nothing is beating it at any focal length. And there's some that are matching it at times, but nothing is beating it. So you're looking at just absolute prime performance. But you've got, I guess, you could argue you've got 180 primes you're carrying along between the 120 and 300. But it's really impressive at this point. For some people, it is a big lens. I think anyone who pretends otherwise would soon be exposed as a liar. But it is, it's a fairly big lens, but the image quality for me is what it's about, is image quality. And when you combine it, you think of the combination of focal lengths you have. If you just carry a crop sensor body, a full frame body, or two, I often have my Z7 with me as well, and a teleconverter. I'm going out in the field, I've got 120 to 630 in a small kit.
And you're all done. Yeah. Well, I'd mentioned to the viewers earlier that you're an amazing photographer. You run your photo tours. You review gear. I think I mentioned also that you're a biologist. Both of us actually have a pretty strong science background. Now, so when you say that you're doing your intense testing, it is incredibly intense. I want the people to know at home that your testing is not just, oh yeah, handheld, I'm gonna go take a few pictures, oh yeah, it looks good. Like you are incredibly rigorous. And that's one of the things that I love about it, is I know that when you go and give an answer, when you go and give a concrete, this is sharper than, or it is not sharper, I know that you didn't just do one picture, that you've done multiple trials, multiple times, at different focal lengths, at different apertures. And it really kind of gives me a sense of, okay, yep, I have some trust here, knowing how in-depth your testing truly is.
Yeah, it's funny because it really comes from my own curiosity about the lens quality, and ultimately I do it for my own photography. So I know the strengths and weaknesses of every lens in my kit. And I've never been one, and I always do it in a field setting, although rigorous, but still in a field setting, because my real concern is what can you actually achieve in the field with this lens, not what does an MTF value or MTF curve tell me. In my view, MTF curves are great in terms of theoretical maximum sharpness. The question becomes, if you're in the field shooting and maybe hand holding the lens, where VR of the lens will, the quality of the VR system will interact with it, the quality of the AF system will interact with it, is what can you get with it get out of it in the field. So I combine those phases of just shooting with, as you were suggesting, very rigorous testing in the field, and try to sort of balance those off and come out with, it takes a long time. I'm not one of these people that can get a lens and have a firm view in a week of what it'll do. It's going to take me, usually takes me a couple months to fully test a lens. Now I've got to wait for the right conditions, et cetera, so, but it has a high value to me. And then I decided years ago, I thought, well, if I'm going to be going through this, why not just put it online? In a way, it keeps me honest too, because there'll be things I'll test like, oh, there'll be a gap there, and someone could criticize that if I don't do that. I may already think I know the answer, but it forces me to be more rigorous, the fact that these are going to go online. So, yeah, but it helps me a lot. And I know it's got to the point where a lot of people are beginning to rely on what I say vis-a-vis their own lens purchases. And one thing there is that there's aspects of it that are unique to the individual. I get the question, what shutter speed can I handhold this lens at? And my question is, well, I don't know. I know what I can handhold at it, but I don't. Everyone's different. So it's something that there's certain things that we can express in absolute terms, but other things will vary with the user.
And that's part of what I think you try and get at with your testing is, it's not just about, like you said, the MTF values. It's also about, well, how does it work in the real world? How does that bokeh look? How does it transition from the in focus to the background look at different focal lengths? Because you might love it at 300 at 2.8, but you can't always shoot it at 2.8. You may have to stop down. So if you don't like it at f4, then that may be a game changer for you in terms of, well, I don't want to touch this. So it's really, I love the progression that you kind of put your users or your viewers through. But I kind of think it's funny because I don't think a lot of them realize how rigorous testing is, and they may think that you're kind of teasing them, that you're dropping all of these different tests that may take a couple months to come up online, and they may see them and go, oh my God, he's teasing us. Like, why can't he just do it all at once? Well, you can't, because it takes so long to do this testing. And like you said, you got to wait for the right settings and the right sun. And oh my God, I very much appreciate how much goes into it. Now, I do have a question about this lens. Is I think a lot of people were probably surprised to see you interested in the 120 to 300, because it isn't technically what a lot of people would consider a wildlife lens. I talked about when I shoot landscapes, I do a lot of my landscape work with telephotos, especially if I'm going and shooting animals. I know you do a lot of the same, where some of your most stunning images, it's about both the environment and the itself. So I think this lens kind of plays quite well with that type of photography.
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly, I'm not your classic throw a 600 millimeter lens on a tripod and wait for a bird to land on a perch sort of photographer. Nor do I do much in the way of roadside photography. It's mostly way off the beaten path. But that being said, I do tend to work with, you nailed a couple points there. I do tend to work with fairly large charismatic megafauna most of the time, which means things like whales, it could be killer whales, humpback whales, you name it. A lot of marine mammal work, a lot of carnivore work. And we're doing that mostly on BC's West Coast. And so I'm not working with tiny subjects to begin with. So while at times, of course, you want a longer lens to maybe grab a beautiful portrait of a grizzly, at the same time, I do work with large animals. And as you indicated, I like often the animalscape environment, where an animalscape to me is a landscape shot with an animal anchoring the image. And I tend to shoot a lot of those, as you do. I actually do a lot of my landscape work with longer lenses. It's just partly a reflection of the way I look at the world. I've always, I work in an environment that's often, you could almost think of it as messy. There's forest everywhere. and you almost have to take a a subsample of the whole scene and just extract that out. And I find telephoto lenses a good way to do it. So I did have some experience with the 120 to 300 millimeter focal length previously with the Sigma 120 to 300, and I really liked that range. And so I was excited about this one, and I knew I'd be able to put it to good use. If someone is the sit back and play with 600 millimeters only, it's probably not the lens
Probably
for
not for
them.
them.
No, it's
Yeah.
probably not the lens for them. However, the thing that has pleased me is, like I say, between the FX and DX bodies, full frame and crop sensor bodies, and its incredible teleconverter friendliness, you do get more focal length than you expected with this lens right off the bat. So you end up with a 630 millimeter f4. Not so bad.
Yeah.
So and I know it's funny because, as I'm sure you're aware, most of the official marketing by Nikon is as a sports lens, and it's certainly well suited to that, of course. But that being said, I'll be more than happy if my competitors pass on the lens. I'm the only one in the field with it, because I see it as a very powerful tool for wildlife photography.
Cool. Well, I got to thank you very much. I'm going to ask one last question before we go. And it's going to be non-techy at all. So we've had a lot of tech. We've talked about the 120 to 300, the 180 to 400, all of those lenses. But from a non-techy point of view, you do a lot of photo tours. You see a lot of different, as you said, megafauna, a lot of amazing different animals across the whole spectrum. Is there one type of animal that you love shooting and you just cannot get enough of?
The next one. No, I'm not a checklist photographer. I'm always looking to make the best photo, or create the best photo I can of the subject I'm working with at the time. That being said, there's certainly a bias in terms of my own interest, both from a biological and a conservation perspective, as well as a photographic perspective on carnivores. And certainly wolves and bears would be near the top of my list in that regard. And I used to ignore black bears and almost focus exclusively on grizzlies, but I'm finding more of a challenge with black bears these days. But wolves are always high. The ones that are highest I haven't got yet, but I'd love to encounter a wolverine in the field. But I've encountered them a few times, but years before I had a camera I was carrying with me. So.
Okay, well, Brad, thank you very much for joining us. If I can go and rope you into it another time, I'd love to have you on and maybe talk about less techie stuff and maybe just more what kind of cameras do you bring and maybe some technique-driven stuff. Just so you know, I'm going to be throwing your link to your blog and to your technique section on your website down below in the comments for these guys to go and view afterwards. So they'll have lots of information to kind of get them started. But thank you very much for joining us, and I'll hopefully talk to you again next time.
Sounds great, Chris. Take care.
All right, well, that was amazing. I cannot believe the images that he's been able to get out of this lens just in the last little while he's been isolated and at home. But let's get on to our next topic, which is getting to know your camera. Now, in this feature, we're going to be talking about picture controls. Now, I know a lot of RAW shooters are sitting there going, why do I need to sit here and listen to this? I shoot RAW. I'm just going to go and throw them on my computer. Why do I need to? Trust me, I'll get to you. It does make sense to go and care about your picture controls. But obviously, if you're a JPEG shooter, you really care about picture controls because you want the images coming out of the camera to be as close to perfect as possible, because most people, when they shoot JPEGs, are going to be doing very little, if not none, editing to their files. So if you're not going to be editing your file, you want it to be looking perfect right out of the camera. I've actually had coworkers of mine who, let's say they had a D90, a very old camera, and they upgraded it to something new. They upgraded it to let's say a D7500, kind of the nice upgrade path. So they're expecting brand new camera, better processor, better sensor. Okay, I should be getting way better image quality. But they come to me and they say, okay, well, wait a second, Chris, I'm actually not all that happy with the image quality out of my new camera. I'm actually happier with my old one. Should I go back to my... It's like, no, wait a second. Let's kind of sit this through. And when I went through it with them, they very specifically were using a different picture control. When they were learning and kind of playing around with their new camera, they had gone and changed their picture control to flat. So that's going to completely flatten everything out. No contrast, no saturation, no sharpness. So when they compared that with they were shooting landscape profile on their older camera, when you compare the two, there's a really, really big difference. So all we had to do, get them flipped into the brand new picture control, and they absolutely loved the camera. So the picture controls for a JPEG user, obviously, it makes a really, really big deal. Also for video users. Video users, if you're shooting and taking the file right out of the camera and that movie file is going to be, you're going to go put it right into clips and you're not going to grade it at all, then you absolutely want to be going and getting your picture control right in camera. Obviously, if you're shooting N-Log, if you're shooting even RAW, then you are going to be really having to be editing your file. You're going to be color grading your video file afterwards. So in that case, you don't really have to worry about your picture control quite as much. But if you are thinking about grading your file, but you're not shooting N-Log, you're not shooting RAW, so you are just getting that MP4 or the MOV right out of the camera, I would highly recommend shooting with the flat picture control. So if you want basically the most versatility when you're color grading afterwards, the flat is going to give you that better control. So if you're video and you're not going to be doing N-Log or RAW, shoot flat. Otherwise, if you're not going to be grading at all and you're shooting videos, make sure you get the picture profile the way you want it before you start recording, because you can't make too many edits afterwards without negatively affecting the file. Now, I generally almost always shoot RAW. So how do I use picture controls? Well, for me, it really comes down to a couple things. It's going to really kind of come down to what am I doing with the file afterwards. Now, it doesn't have to be afterwards on my computer. After I've taken the picture, what if I see that I've gotten this amazing shot and I quickly want to go and edit it in camera, process it to a JPEG, and then send it off to my smartphone where I can post it on Instagram, I can send it to friends and family, whatever the case may be. How am I going to get a better quality photo out of the camera if I'm not making the proper edits? So let me actually show you here. So if I have a file that I've taken, let's say this one right here. So I took this a couple weeks ago when I was playing around with the 120-300 and the D6. And let's say I want to go and edit this. So I'm going to hit the I button now, and I'm going to go to Retouch. In Retouch, I'm going to go Raw Process. And from here, choose a destination. Now I have all of these different options. I can go and change the image quality, the image size. I can change the white balance, the exposure comp, all the normal things that you would be able to when you're editing a RAW file. But the key here is I can also change the picture control. So if I go in here and I choose, let's say portrait, the way that it was shot, or I can have any of the neutral, vivid, standard, auto, or if I'm using a newer camera, I have all of the different options of the new creative picture controls. So these give me a ton of different flexibility to really kind of get a different look than I normally would be able to right out of the camera. So they're very simple to select and to be able to choose right in camera. And if you do want to see it large, I can hit the little plus here. So that's now it with the Sunday creative picture control. So if I want to go and select that and I want to change my ISO, noise reduction, whether I want sRGB or Adobe, do I want vignette control turned on, active delighting, my diffraction compensation, all of that is done. I hit execute, and from there I now have a JPEG that's pretty much done the way I want. But you can go even more. Now you can either do it from the screen or you can actually make it a dedicated change. And let me actually show you here. So if I go into our picture control menu, within the picture control menu, obviously you have all of those different picture controls you want. But what happens if you want to make a little tweak to the file? You're not totally happy with portrait, let's say. So I know that with portrait, I use this quite a lot because it really kind of opens up the shadows. It's pretty much based on neutral. It's based very much on a neutral look, but the color tones for skin in particular look really good. The sharpness is added just a touch higher. So I find portrait gives me a really kind of good starting point. But what happens if I want to tweak it just a little bit myself? Well, all I have to do is I have to hit the right key on the D-pad here, And that now brings me into the ability to quickly make changes to it. So I can make sharpening changes, whether it's the mid-range, the clarity, if I want to do a quick sharpening fix. I can change the contrast, so I can bump that up. I can bump the saturation up or down. And then once I hit the OK, you now see there the picture control portrait has a little asterisk next to it. That asterisk means you've made a change, just so you know. So that portrait picture control is not default anymore. There has been a change to it. Now I can actually go even a little bit further than this as well. So let's say I don't just want to make a saturation or a slight clarity change. If I want to go even further, I can actually go and do something that a lot of people don't realize you have the ability to do. I can now go and using a Nikon app, free for PC and Mac, it's called Nikon Picture Control Utility 2. And when you actually see it here, I've actually loaded this file in myself. So you can change that with the change image option. So you can actually select your own raw file. And once you've done that, it brings it up here in the screen. So you're not working with just some random file that we give you. You can go and input your own file. And then from there, you can use any of the settings on the left-hand side as a starting point. Again, let's say I really like the way the portrait starts. So let's kind of have a look at that. So I've selected portrait. Now on the right-hand side is very similar to what you saw in camera. So you can make quick sharpening options, you can make contrast, brightness. But the key here is you can actually go and make a custom curve. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but let's say I just want to quickly do this. I want to open it up a little bit. Now, one of the reasons I really like this is for me in particular, I have as you can see, a very dark colored, very black colored dog here. And when I'm shooting it most of the time, especially in bright outdoor, very contrasty scenes, all of the blacks, whether it's the face, the facial details, they're all just completely crushed. So I want to be able to create my own picture control that I can then go. So once we've gone back in here, let's say I'm happy with this here, I've bumped up the saturation, done all the changes I want, I actually go to Save to Card. So by going to Save to Card, I'm now able to go and save this to a memory card, XQD, SD, or even if you're using older compact flash, save it to a memory card, go bring it out, pop it into my camera, load it in there, and now my custom picture control is loaded directly into my camera. So I can either edit or shoot that way anytime I want. As you can see here, if you're using one of the newer cameras, Z6, Z7, Z50, D780, D6, you do also have options with all of the creative picture controls as well. And you can actually see all of my custom ones that I've made in the past. I do a lot of night photography. I have a night photography 1 and 2, slightly different tweaks to them. When I did my Africa trip, I did have some shadowy options and good light options, just so I could get a better tone curve right out of the camera. I wouldn't have to worry about editing it if I wanted to go and quickly send something up to Instagram. And I've made a couple puppy tweaks just so that when I'm shooting, I don't have to always rely on the inbuilt option. So when we are looking at picture controls, you really have a lot of different options, whether it's in the camera itself or when you're actually doing it by yourself, creating your brand new picture control. So I will go and put a link into the bottom here for that Learn and Explore article. The Learn and Explore article will be on picture controls. We'll tell you whether you're a JPEG or a RAW shooter. It'll really kind of break it down for you. So to make sure to look for that link. And lastly, I am going to end with our Interesting Reads segment. So Interesting Reads is the place where I kind of go and give you guys the ability to do a deep dive on your own when you're at home and you have a little bit more time. So first week I gave you Joe McNally. Last episode I went and talked about Dave Black. This time, keeping in line with the guest that we had with Brad Hill, I'm actually going to be putting Brad's blog as a link down below. He also has a whole lot of different options, different segments on his website, so I'm also going to throw down there his techniques side. In the techniques side, it's basically to help wildlife photographers kind of get over that hump of learning their camera, seeing what works, what doesn't. So he really kind of helps you get past that all without having to worry about it and spend all the time yourself. So there's going to be a technique side, and there's also going to be the blog section. Now the blog is quite technical. It does go through a lot of what he very similar to what he talked about today with the 120 to 300. So if you do want to hear about the 500mm PF, the 180 to 400mm lens, he has a lot of great information on his blog. So go lose yourself in the techiness, go enjoy it, as well as his technique side as well. But until the next episode, make sure you guys stay inside, stay safe. We're gonna keep social distancing ourselves here as well. But until the next episode, thanks very much for joining us, and I'll see you next time.